The moment I accepted the shame, ready to swallow the public dismissal, was the exact second Adrian Sterling finally decided to speak. He was leaning against the mahogany frame of the conference room door, my best friend's father, observing the quiet carnage. My supervisor, Mr. Harrison, was mid-sentence, dissecting my presentation errors, but Adrian didn't look at him. His focus was locked entirely on the faint tremor of my hands clutching the laser pointer. He moved then, not rushing, just walking slowly into the light, demanding the attention of everyone present, including my own paralyzed breath. It wasn't pity I saw in his eyes, but a controlled, simmering frustration that terrified me more than the meeting itself. He had seen my surrender. My name is Elodie Vance. I am 26, and I work in market analysis for Sterling & Associates, a massive architectural development firm. My life is built on neat, predictable lines, much like the spreadsheets I manage. I live in a small, well-kept apartment on the Upper East Side, not because I can afford it, but because my mother's cousin moved to Florida and needed someone to water the plants and pay the maintenance fees. It's functional, quiet, and slightly too large for a person who mostly only interacts with delivery drivers and the automated coffee machine. The meeting with Mr. Harrison had been exactly what I expected. Competent work delivered without fanfare, followed by micro-criticism designed less to improve the project and more to reinforce his own perceived intellectual superiority. I was the silent, dependable gear in the machine. That was my role. I accepted it fully. Extraordinary things do not happen to people like me. I had a low emotional baseline, which protected me from disappointment. I didn't crave attention. I just craved quiet competence. After the adrenaline from Adrian Sterling's unexpected intervention wore off, he merely ended the meeting by declaring the data more than adequate and walking out, leaving Harrison stammering. I returned to my desk. The office hummed around me. My cubicle felt like an observation deck, looking out onto a world of ambition I didn't fully belong to. I unpacked my lunch: whole wheat bread, turkey, and a meticulous arrangement of carrot sticks. It was Tuesday. Tuesday meant listening to a historical podcast while I ate. Predictable, safe. My relationship with Adrian Sterling was tenuous, existing only through the filtration of his daughter, Chloe, who had been my roommate in college and remained my anchor in New York. Chloe was vibrant, loud, and full of the careless confidence that only comes from being constantly loved. I saw Adrian maybe twice a year, usually at Chloe's birthday dinners, where he was always the centerpiece, imposing, immaculately dressed, and usually preoccupied with discreet phone calls. At Sterling & Associates, he was simply the owner, a distant, almost mythical figure who resided on the top floor. I'd worked here for 3 years and had exchanged perhaps 10 words with him in total, mostly polite acknowledgments in the lobby. He was a mountain of authority. I was a pebble on the path. Tonight was supposed to be the usual routine. Work until 6:30, gym, supermarket, and then home to meticulously assemble a recipe I'd picked out for the week. The simplicity was comforting. I liked knowing exactly how the next 6 hours would unfold. I liked the safety of knowing I wouldn't have to navigate any unexpected emotional landscape. I certainly didn't expect the man who had just saved me from a pointless humiliation to show up anywhere near my carefully constructed bubble of mediocrity. The thought of confronting him about his intervention made my stomach clench. I preferred invisibility. It was easier not to owe anyone anything, especially Adrian Sterling, the man whose approval felt like sunlight, powerful but impossible to hold on to. The routine was disrupted not by a grand event, but by a leaky pipe. Just as I was packing up my laptop bag, Chloe texted me, a string of frantic emojis followed by text in all caps. Kitchen flooding. Dad is traveling. Need help now. I'm trying to find the shutoff valve. Chloe lived a few blocks downtown, in a stunning pre-war apartment that Adrian had bought for her college graduation. She was notoriously incapable of handling basic maintenance, seeing any mechanical issue as a personal betrayal. I sighed. The gym would have to wait. Duty called. I was the reliable friend, the one who knew how to turn off the main water supply and who actually read the lease agreement fine print. It wasn't the heroic role, but it was my role. I grabbed my bag, hailed a cab, and navigated the rush hour traffic down to Chloe's building. When I arrived, the doorman, Mr. Rodriguez, a stern man who always remembered my name, gave me a knowing, slightly exasperated look. "Miss Vance, glad you're here. The water is quite excessive." The sight inside Chloe's impeccably designed kitchen was, indeed, excessive. Water streamed from under the sink, pooling across the marble floor. Chloe, wearing a silk dressing gown, was frantically scooping water into a salad bowl. "Elodie, thank God. I called the superintendent, but he's dealing with a fire alarm on the 12th floor," she wailed, her voice high with panic. Okay. Don't panic. Where's the main valve?" I asked, dropping my bag and rolling up the sleeves of my sensible blazer. We spent the next hour soaked, wrestling with a corroded brass valve located behind a stack of rarely used baking sheets. I finally managed to twist it shut, the sudden silence of the water flow sounding louder than the torrent had been. Chloe collapsed onto a dining chair, dramatically wiping a smudge of grease from her cheek. "You saved my life." "Again," she declared, reaching for her phone. "I owe you. Dinner, drinks, whatever you want." I waved her off, already grabbing towels to start the cleanup. "Just tell me where the mop is. I need to get home and shower. I still need to make dinner." "Nonsense," Chloe insisted. "Look, I'm ordering us delivery. Stay. We can watch a trashy movie." It was a Tuesday. I had planned salmon and steamed broccoli, but the mess was too large to ignore, and honestly, the thought of sitting down with Chloe and forgetting about Harrison and the strange intensity of Adrian Sterling's gaze was suddenly appealing. It was a completely accidental detour from my planned path. Nothing more. A mundane plumbing disaster leading to an impromptu evening with my best friend. "Fine," I conceded, reaching for the heaviest floor towel. "But I'm helping you clean this up first. And no horror movies. I need low-stakes entertainment." I definitely wasn't expecting low-stakes entertainment to be interrupted by the abrupt, powerful click of the front door opening, followed by the sight of the very man I had tried to avoid all afternoon. Adrian Sterling, who was supposed to be traveling, stood on the threshold, looking entirely too imposing for the damp, chaotic scene before him. Adrian Sterling was not meant for casual entryways. He was a man built for boardrooms and grand gestures, not for standing in a puddle on his daughter's tiled floor, still wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit. He carried a heavy leather briefcase and looked bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that prestigious responsibility inflicts. His presence sucked the air out of the room, turning the playful chaos of our cleanup into an awkward silence. "Dad, you're back early," Chloe squeaked, scrambling up and pulling her silk robe tighter, suddenly remembering her lack of appropriate attire. Adrian barely glanced at her. His eyes, the color of aged whiskey, scanned the mess, the wet towels, the lingering smell of damp drywall, and finally, me. I was kneeling by the counter, my blazer discarded, my shirt clinging to my shoulders from the moisture, and my hair tied back in a messy knot. I felt supremely exposed, caught in a state of unglamorous utility. "The Atlanta flight was canceled due to weather," he stated, his voice a low rumble that always commanded attention, even when stating a simple fact. He set his briefcase down with quiet deliberation, the sound emphasizing the sudden stillness. "What is happening here?" Chloe launched into a dramatic, exaggerated recount of the plumbing incident. I just continued to wring out a towel, trying desperately to become one with the kitchen floor. He was standing too close, radiating a kind of controlled energy that made the small space feel even smaller. Adrian Sterling was 30 years my senior, a titan of industry, and the emotional distance between us felt vast. A canyon carved by status and expectation. He was my friend's father, my company's CEO, and simply existing near him felt like trespassing. Elodie was amazing, Dad. She fixed it. The super couldn't even make it down, Chloe finished, gesturing wildly toward me. Adrian finally focused his gaze entirely on me. It was an unnervingly thorough look, taking in the smudge of dirt on my cheek and the way I avoided his direct line of sight. It wasn't predatory, but it felt intensely observant, the same way he might study a complicated schematic. Miss Vance, he acknowledged, the use of my surname reinforcing the professional distance. Yet his tone was softer than it had been in the conference room hours earlier. Thank you for assisting Chloe. It was nothing, Mr. Sterling. Just a minor plumbing issue, I murmured, my voice sounding strained and small in the face of his formidable presence. I stood up, feeling a powerful urge to retrieve my jacket and retreat to the safety of my own predictable apartment. He took a step closer, and for a fleeting second, I smelled his cologne, sharp cedar overlaid with something expensive and warm. He wasn't looking at the leak anymore. He was looking at me, and I realized he was still seeing the girl who had been silenced earlier that day. There was a brief, uncomfortable pause, stretching the silence until it felt thin and ready to snap. I braced myself for a comment about the meeting, a polite, dismissive word of encouragement. Instead, he just looked tired, a sudden, unfiltered glimpse of exhaustion that belied his powerful posture. It was an intensely personal observation to make, and it completely rattled my professional defense shield. The silence stretched taut between us, a thick, pressurized membrane. Chloe, oblivious, was already on the phone with the delivery service, arguing about the lack of available sushi rolls. This left Adrian and me alone in the damp kitchen, an intimacy I absolutely did not want. He finally spoke, his voice low, almost a private comment intended only for me. You were quiet today. My breath hitched. It was a simple observation, but the weight he put on the word quiet made it sound like an accusation or, worse, an analysis. I quickly averted my gaze, pretending to scrutinize the way I'd folded the cleaning rag. Mr. Harrison was reviewing the quarterly projections, I replied, maintaining a strictly formal tone. I had provided the data he requested. You had provided the data, yes, Adrian countered, taking a single, slow step closer, forcing me to tilt my head up to meet his eyes. But he was undermining your conclusions, Elodie, and you did not counter him. The use of my first name was an immediate, subtle shift in dynamics, a blurring of the professional line that made my skin prickle with uncomfortable awareness. I felt a defensive heat rising in my face. I didn't think it was productive to engage in a debate during the presentation, Mr. Sterling. The numbers speak for themselves. I held his gaze for maybe 3 heartbeats, but it felt like an eternity. He let out a short, almost imperceptible breath, not a sigh of frustration, but perhaps one of weary understanding. Sometimes, Miss Vance, you have to be the one to interpret the numbers, not just present them. I felt the sting of the critique, subtle but profound. Was he disappointed? Was he observing a flaw he hadn't noticed before? I immediately started dissecting the interaction. Was I too passive? Did he think less of me because I didn't fight Harrison? I chastised myself internally for being so easily intimidated. Stop overanalyzing, Elodie. He's just your boss. He's just offering professional advice. But the way he was looking at me didn't feel like professional advice. His expression was too complex for a standard workplace evaluation. There was a depth there, a quiet intensity that suggested he hadn't just watched me be silent, but had felt my silence. You look exhausted, I blurted out, a completely unprofessional and involuntary reaction to the visible lines of stress around his eyes. I instantly regretted the intimacy of the comment. Adrian Sterling paused, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He didn't deny it or dismiss it. He simply leaned against the marble countertop, crossing his arms over his chest, a gesture that somehow made him seem less imposing and more accessible. Perhaps the Atlanta trip was simply postponed, he finally said, his voice dropping another octave. Perhaps I needed to be home. The double meaning hit me instantly. Was he talking about the canceled flight? Or was he implying that the stress of his work required him to be anchored? Or was this entire exchange, standing here in the residual humidity of a water leak, about something else entirely? I dismissed the last thought immediately. I was projecting. Adrian Sterling was a married man, my friend's father, my CEO. This was just a moment of shared late-day exhaustion. Nothing more. But the sheer weight of his presence made the mundane kitchen feel charged, ready for a spark. Chloe finally hung up the phone, announcing that our Thai food would arrive in 45 minutes. She then looked between her father, leaning heavily against the counter, and me, paralyzed with awkward politeness, and seemed to finally sense the subtle shift in the air. "I'm going to grab a quick shower, Dad. You two talk about work, I guess? Elodie, don't leave. The spring rolls are on me." As the bathroom door clicked shut, the silence returned, heavier this time. I felt the urgent need to leave, to break the proximity, but my feet were rooted. I fiddled with the damp edge of the counter. Adrian didn't initiate a professional conversation. He pushed off the marble, walked over to the nearest dining chair, and slowly sat down. It wasn't a powerful executive move. It was the movement of a man shedding a heavy weight. "I apologize for today's meeting," he said, and the apology was so unexpected, so direct, that it completely disarmed me. "You don't need to apologize, Mr. Sterling. You ended it before it became difficult," he scoffed, a dry, almost bitter sound. "I ended the symptom, not the cause. Harrison has been leveraging his position, flexing his authority. He sees competent young talent as a threat, and I should have stepped in sooner. I waited, unsure how to respond to this frank admission of corporate dysfunction coming from the top. I watched you, Elodie," he confessed, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped loosely. His posture was open, almost defenseless. "When he criticized your methodology, you just absorbed it. You knew he was wrong. I could see it in the way your eyes narrowed, in the tension in your shoulders, but you didn't fight back." My throat tightened. It felt like he was looking directly into the core of my fear. The fear of conflict, of standing out, of being wrong publicly. It was only a minor point, I insisted weakly. "It was respect," he corrected, his eyes locking onto mine, earnest and intense. "That's what he was taking, and you let him. Do you always let people do that?" The question wasn't hostile. It was a genuine inquiry into my character. And in that moment, the powerful CEO was gone, replaced by a man burdened by observation and perhaps deep empathy. The asymmetry of our status hadn't disappeared, but the emotional power dynamic had shifted completely. He was suddenly sharing a burden of knowledge about me that felt incredibly private. "It's easier," I admitted, my voice a whisper. The honesty spilled out before I could censor it. "It's easier to stay silent, less complicated. I'm not good at the confrontation. I just want to do my work and go home." Adrian nodded slowly, absorbing my confession with a solemnity that surprised me. He didn't judge me for being passive. He seemed to recognize it. "I know that feeling," he said, the admission quiet and heavy, the desire to simply disappear into competence. "But when you occupy a seat like mine, Elodie, you don't get that luxury. You are constantly watched, constantly judged, and sometimes you just want to be seen for who you are when the suit is off, when the guard is down." He looked utterly weary, stripped down by the long day and the unexpected travel. It was the first time I hadn't seen him as Adrian Sterling, the CEO. He was just Adrian, a man who admitted to craving invisibility, and that, more than any grand gesture, made him suddenly, dangerously real. The timer on the oven clock beeped, signaling that Chloe's spring rolls were about to be delivered. The sound sliced through the intense moment, providing a much-needed return to reality. Adrian didn't move, but the expression of deep introspection softened slightly. "You should eat, Elodie," he said, rising slowly from the chair. "You had a tough day." "So did you," I countered, the boldness of my previous comments making a quiet return. He managed a faint, tired smile. "I'll grab a drink. Water, I think. Then I should probably review the damage before the insurance claims start flying." He moved toward the small, immaculate bar cart in the corner, and I followed him with my eyes. The way he carried himself, even when tired, was economical and precise. He poured a glass of sparkling water, offering me the bottle without asking. I took it gratefully. We stood side by side near the window overlooking the city lights, the vibrant rush of New York, a silent backdrop to our quiet, shared moment. We didn't talk about work, the leak, or even Chloe. We talked about books. Specifically, a dense 19th century novel I had mentioned reading on my profile in the employee directory, a profile I was sure only HR ever looked at. I tried reading Middlemarch when I was at university, Adrian confessed, swirling the water in his glass. It seemed like a requirement for ambition. I found it slow, but deeply insightful about the subtle ways people ruin their own lives. "It's about the beauty of small lives, I think," I offered, taking a slow sip of the cool water. "Not everyone needs a grand narrative. Some stories are just about trying to be good, even when it's boring." He turned his head to look at me, and his eyes held a softness I had never imagined possible. It was a gaze of pure, comfortable recognition. "You value the boring, don't you, Elodie? The dependable." "I value safety," I corrected him, the admission feeling strangely light. "Predictability is safety." "And what happens when safety starts feeling like confinement?" he asked, not pressing, just offering the question into the air between us. It was a rhetorical question, yet I felt compelled to answer honestly. "Then you just try to ignore the desire for more." A minute passed in complete silence. It wasn't an awkward silence, but one laced with the quiet truth of two people who had stumbled into a momentary, profound connection. We weren't touching, yet I felt the heat radiating from him. I noticed the faint silver streaks at his temples and the easy authority of his stance. He was the most powerful person I knew, yet right now, discussing the inner life of a fictional character, he felt like the only person who had truly seen me today. There were no promises exchanged, no grand declarations. Just the shared space, the dim lighting, and the startling realization that beneath the veneer of CEO, he was a lonely man, and beneath my veneer of quiet competence, I was someone yearning to be truly seen. The arrival of the delivery buzzer broke the spell, signaling the return to the real world. The mundane logistics of paying the delivery man forced a sudden, cold jolt of reality. I needed to leave. This connection, this easy, profound recognition, was entirely outside the lines I had drawn for my life. It was dangerous. Not because Adrian Sterling was a bad man, quite the opposite, but because of the sheer complexity of our entanglement. He was Chloe's father. He was my boss. The age gap was a yawning chasm of life experience, status, and expectation. I started collecting my things, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone enacting an escape plan. I retrieved my damp blazer and my laptop bag, forcing a cheerful, slightly too loud tone. "Well, the crisis is averted. The food is here. I should really get going. Chloe will be out soon, and I still need to organize my week." Adrian was watching me, his arms now relaxed at his sides, his expression unreadable. He knew I was retreating. He didn't try to stop me with words, but his stillness felt like a tangible barrier. My internal monologue was frantic. "Stop this, Elodie. This is a moment of stress bonding. He's tired, you're empathetic, it's a fluke. If you linger, if you allow this vulnerability to continue, you risk everything." Everything in my world meant my job, my friendship with Chloe, and the quiet dignity I held onto so tightly. I couldn't risk being the subject of gossip, or worse, causing tension in Chloe's family. Elodie, stay. The spring rolls are too good to rush off, Chloe called through the closed bathroom door, hearing my exit cues. I can't, Chloe. Tell your dad I'll email him the formal analysis on Friday. I was desperately trying to reestablish the professional barrier, stacking up polite corporate language like a defensive wall. Adrian finally moved, stepping slightly into my path toward the door. He wasn't aggressive, just present. His proximity made the air crackle again. You don't need to run, Elodie, he said, his voice low, a soft challenge. I shook my head, avoiding eye contact as I fiddled with the strap of my bag. I'm not running. I'm just maintaining routine. It's important. Why? The question was so simple, so direct, that it stopped me cold. Because if I stop following the routine, things might get messy. And I don't like messy. I could feel him studying me, not judging, but trying to comprehend the depth of my self-imposed limitations. The irony was devastating. I was drawn to the one man who could dismantle my carefully constructed life, simply by acknowledging my existence. The professional boundary was my shield, and I had to keep it up, even if the man standing before me was suddenly more appealing, more human, and more dangerous than any stranger. The stakes felt impossibly high. Stepping through that door meant returning to safety. Staying meant gambling with an emotion I couldn't even name. I felt the sharp ache of wanting to stay and the cold certainty that I absolutely, unequivocally had to go. I took a deep, shaky breath, preparing to step around him. My mind was screaming for the exit. I needed to escape the sheer gravity of his presence before I did something completely regrettable, like reaching out to touch the faint wrinkle between his eyebrows that betrayed his exhaustion. Adrian didn't move. He simply tilted his head, the directness of his gaze intense enough to feel like a physical pressure. The small apartment, the spilled water, the distant sound of running shower water, it all dissolved around us. It was just this moment, this narrow space, and the truth hovering between us. You think this is accidental, Elodie, he stated, his voice quiet, almost conspiratorial, cutting through my internal panic. You think I only noticed you today because Harrison was being an idiot, or because you happened to be here helping Chloe. I swallowed, the sound loud in my ears. I couldn't speak. I could only stare into the unwavering depth of his eyes, feeling my careful defenses crumble. He took a controlled step back, giving me space, but cementing his words with unwavering conviction. I watch everyone in that firm. It's my job. I see who hides behind the data, who craves the spotlight, and who simply works. But you, Elodie, he paused, and the weight of my name on his tongue made my entire body stiffen. You are the most disciplined person I know. You are utterly predictable, yes. But you are also genuinely kind, relentlessly competent, and the only person in that entire office who looks directly into my eyes when they speak, without demanding anything. I felt tears sting my eyes. The unexpected recognition was overwhelming. It wasn't about my quarterly report. It was about me. I have been watching you for nearly 3 years, he admitted, his confession shattering the last remnants of my denial. Not in a professional capacity. I've watched you walk past my office. I've watched you read at your desk during lunch. I have watched you choose silence instead of conflict, time and time again. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, ensuring his words were only for me. This was the moment I realized he hadn't just saved me in the meeting. He had understood my surrender. You asked me why I came home early, why the canceled flight felt like a necessity. He continued, the intensity in his eyes blazing. I saw your fear in that meeting today. I saw you accept the injustice. And I realized that if I didn't step in, If I let you continue to believe that silence was safety, you would never give me the opportunity to say this to you. He paused one final time, the climax of the moment hanging heavy. Then he spoke the words that utterly dismantled me. Simple, direct, and devastating. I need you to know, Elodie, that I didn't happen upon this moment. I have been waiting for the chance to make you choose something other than invisibility. I don't want you to run back to safety. I want you to look at me right now and tell me if you feel the exact same overwhelming truth that I feel standing here with you. Because I see you. I really see you. And I have, for a very long time. My hands, which had been clutching the strap of my bag, finally dropped to my sides. I was trembling, not with cold, but with the sudden terrifying exposure of being seen. My entire life had been predicated on avoiding this level of scrutiny, this raw, unfiltered acknowledgement. My mouth was dry. I couldn't form a coherent sentence about the 3 years of quiet awareness I had also maintained. The noticing of how Adrian always ordered black coffee, the careful way he thanked the cleaning staff, the way his jaw always tightened when he was deep in thought. I had seen him too, from the periphery, assuming my observations were just the harmless habit of an overly observant employee. I don't know what you expect me to say, I finally managed, my voice sounding strained and high. It was the absolute truth. I was utterly unprepared for this emotional ambush. I expect you to be honest, he countered, his gaze unwavering. For once, Elodie, forget the routine. Forget the rules. Forget the consequences. Just tell me what you feel right now. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, letting the reality of the situation sink in. Adrian Sterling, my best friend's powerful father, was standing 2 feet away from me, asking me to discard the very shield I had built my adulthood around. He was asking me to break my own safety rules. When I opened my eyes, the fear was still there, but it was now competing fiercely with a blazing, unfamiliar warmth, the exhilarating terror of standing at the edge of a precipice. I feel terrified, I confessed, the word a ragged exhale. I feel like this is a mistake, an impossibility. You are Adrian Sterling. I'm just Elodie Vance. We have no business having this conversation. It's too messy. He didn't argue the point of our differences. He simply absorbed the confession of my fear. Messy is often where the real things happen, Elodie. And if I say yes, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. If I admit that I feel this charge, this awareness, this overwhelming sense of recognition. If I admit that I have been observing you too, not because you're the CEO, but because you are the only quiet thing in this city that I can't quite figure out. What then? He didn't offer a passionate promise or a dramatic solution. He simply looked at me with an expression of intense relief mixed with profound vulnerability. Then we stop being quiet, he said. We stop choosing silence. We accept the fear, and we simply take the next step together. No grand plan, no guarantees. Just the conscious decision not to deny this truth anymore. I looked at him, at the lines of exhaustion on his face, the unwavering honesty in his eyes, and realized that my fear of rejection was less potent than my fear of going back to being invisible. I can't promise anything, I said, a deep tremor running through my voice. But I won't deny it. I won't run back to safety tonight. It wasn't a heroic choice. It was an honest admission of surrender to an irresistible force. I chose the fear of the unknown over the comfort of the familiar. I stood there for a long moment, the scent of cedar and the slight humidity of the kitchen filling the space. The relief that flooded Adrian's features when I agreed not to run was palpable, momentarily easing the tension from his shoulders. He didn't rush forward, didn't make a sudden move to close the physical distance. He respected the fragile nature of the choice I had just made. Chloe's shower turned off. The sound of water draining was the final, firm signal that our private bubble was about to burst. Adrian reached out, not to touch me, but to gently take the heavy laptop bag from my shoulder. It was a gesture of quiet, practical care that spoke volumes. "You're soaked," he observed, looking down at my damp shirt. "You need to get home and warm up. I can have a car take you." "I don't need a car," I murmured, feeling the unexpected lightness where the bag had been. "I live close enough to walk. I need the air." "Then I'll walk with you," he stated simply, retrieving his heavy trench coat and car keys from the hook near the door. He didn't ask for permission, but made the assumption that our connection, once acknowledged, required proximity. I didn't object. The thought of walking out into the cool evening air, with the towering presence of Adrian Sterling beside me, felt like the necessary next step, a movement away from the contained reality of the apartment and into the vast, unknown city. As we reached the front door, Chloe emerged, wrapped in a fresh towel, rubbing her wet hair. "Leaving already, Elodie? Dad, you're not going to stand her up for the spring rolls, are you?" "Miss Vance has had a long day, Chloe," Adrian replied smoothly, the CEO control effortlessly returning to his voice, completely shielding the intimate conversation we'd just shared. "I'm just seeing her to the street. I'll be right back." Chloe gave me a quick, grateful hug. "Text me when you're home safe, E. Thanks again for saving my life." "You're welcome, C," I replied, the normalcy of the exchange a sharp contrast to the seismic shift that had just occurred. The massive door of the building swung open, and we stepped out onto the quiet street, the autumn air immediately cool against my damp skin. Adrian adjusted his pace to match mine, a slow, deliberate rhythm. The city lights were sharp and indifferent, but the space between us felt warm and distinct. We didn't talk for the first block. The silence now was different. It wasn't the silence of avoidance, but the silence of processing a shared, tremendous truth. My hands were no longer trembling. The fear was still a dull thrum beneath my ribs, but now it was laced with something exhilarating. The feeling of finally having chosen to exist outside the safe parameters of my own life. I looked up at the man walking beside me, the man who had seen my silence and forced me to speak. I had no idea where this path led, but for the first time in a very long time, I was moving towards something I hadn't planned, and the unpredictability felt like the most terrifying, wonderful thing in the world. If Elodie's journey from quiet observer to breaking her own rules resonated with you, and if you've ever wondered what it feels like when the most off-limits person in your life finally sees you, hit the like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story about the dangerous line between professional distance and irresistible connection. Drop a comment and tell me, what's the most important rule you would break for honesty?